I don't know, it takes a
Last week I kind of characterized what we're going to do this week by a little story with Alexander the Great, and I'll reiterate that. Alexander had basically conquered the world, the known world. He was in India, and he was just across the river from the final conquering. And he was coming down a mountain path with his army, and all of a sudden he came up against a community of 1,000 monks. And Alexander said to the monks, "You all need to move to the side and let us pass." And the monks said, "No, you need to move aside and let us pass." And Alexander said, "No, you need to let us pass, for I have conquered the world." And the head monk said, "No, you need to move to the side and let us pass, for we have conquered the need and the desire to conquer the world." The story is Alexander moved to the side, and the community of monks passed. Over and over, we see that there's this place where we want peace. We are on the edge today of a third world conflict. It's hard to think about the world today and how are we going to resolve this? Is it going to be some final fight? And I'm going to suggest, yes, there is a final fight, but it's not out there. It's in here. And the thing about it is direct conflict will not work. And we're going to be talking about that. We're talking about a spiritual battlefield of the mind, of the soul. In the West, you see a battle against Satan and evil. From Job to Revelations, you see this battle going on. Even the word Israel means to wrestle with God. This spiritual battlefield. And in the East, well, Buddha has desire. We're battling desire the whole time. And if you look at early Hinduism, it's really about battling illusion. And then you get into late Hinduism, and it's really about being in the world and participating in this battle that I think frames the whole thing. It's a battle between the waking versus the sleeping. And those two forces have been at play in the world since forever. The justice conflict has been around since probably 800 before the Common Era, when we get Isaiah, when we get the Buddha, when we get Lao Tzu, when we get these different understandings that show us a metric that cannot be measured and yet has a yield. You see, we are in this world of conflict, and we're living the soul, the mind. It's a house of mirrors. And again, direct conflict is not going to work. Like judo, we have to somehow turn the very sleeping forces into waking. And how do we do that? This week I've looked at the 12 steps as keen insight. And for those of you who don't know, 12 Steps has its roots in Carl Jung, believe it or not. But there's certain things, surrender and submission to what? To a higher power, realizing there's a context bigger than yourself, a certain honesty and humility and continual self-reflection. These are all aspects that are part of this final fight on the battlefield of me. And as much as the world is in trouble, the troubles of the world are reflections of our inner conflicts. And until we find a way to resolve those inner conflicts, we will never resolve our outer conflicts. So here we are. We're at the deep end. My name is Red Hawk. I'm coming to you from Spokane, Washington. Mary Ann Rudis is coming to you from Spokane Valley, Washington. And Bob Hayes from Florida. Somewhere in Florida. That's a big state. Where are you coming from, Bob?
Central Florida.
Central Florida. There you go. We're coming from East Washington, which is the conservative side of the state, which says to me they really need us here. But that gets into the conflict and how it reflects outside. This whole conflict, this final fight on the battlefield of me. Bob, first comments?
Well, we were talking briefly before we started today, and the first thing that occurred to me was, is this final fight ever final? And the more I think about it, the more I think that it's a continuous thing. As soon as we're conscious, we begin that fight. And it's really not fair. It's not a fair fight because we're fighting against ourselves while we're trying to fight for ourselves.
Wow.
And by that I mean we disguise all of the important issues through a variety of different ways. We've talked about them in other episodes. All of the different ways that we pretend something's not real or something's not happening to us, or we change it, we project it onto someone else, or we switch it around and find ways to rationalize why we're doing certain things rather than really get to the root cause of it. So the fight is really something that we have to, first of all, take seriously, and second of all, be very careful that we don't fool ourselves into picking the wrong enemies in that fight.
Amen. Well, who is it that said, Pogo, we have met the enemy, and it is ourselves? And I have to say, fighting against ourselves while fighting for ourselves is a profound statement, and one worthy of a tattoo. Marianne, how about you? First thoughts on the final fight on the battlefield of me?
Okay, well, I just have to respond to that for a second. Maybe not a tattoo, but a wall plaque. But anyway.
There you go.
Yeah. But I think that, the battle is within ourselves. And if we believe that the world is what we are creating, and then it's reflecting all of these internal battles that we're all struggling with. And, there's outward power over others that we see, and when we don't understand that it's the power over ourselves that we have to master, and that's what we can master. And when we can have power over ourselves, then that is what we will bring out into the world, and we can create the kind of world that we want to see. I think that you had talked about this final battle, and I agree, it's ongoing, and I think it's ongoing in each one of us. And we all have our own personal Armageddon going on, and we are struggling to figure out what side we're on. And there is no neutrality here. You have to choose what you believe. You have to choose the way you want to be in the world, and understand that every single one of our actions and every single one of even our thoughts, and Jesus talked about this, even our thoughts are powerful, and they create ripple effects out in the world. And so when we can master ourselves, which is a lifelong journey, I mean, it's not something that there are very few individuals on this planet that ever completed that while they were still here, but it's something to aspire to. Yeah. And having that mastery over ourselves. And so, I kind of want to get away from the whole fight language. I mean, there's a part.
Okay, I want to stop you because I don't want to get away from that language. I think it's important because it's already part of the human being, from Arjuna to the Bible. So that's precisely why I wanted to have this conversation. Is I think the trick is, and Marianne, I'll turn it back over to you. It's like judo. We can't think in terms of conflict, yet we cannot deny that we are in a field of conflict.
So, well, and that's where I think that we will never change the world as long as we stay in that mindset. Because that is where we have to start to allow this flow of life to come through us, and we jam it up. we're the ones that are jamming it up. So I will respectfully disagree and say that I think that this is something that we need to change in ourselves. And yes, there are forces out there that will require us to fight them but we don't need to use our own resources to do that.
And I'm talking about what's going on within us, and that field of conflict is a priori. Now, what you just talked about was nirvana. The only way you escape desire is nirvana. You have to totally escape. So I don't think we're there or anywhere even close to even developing a language that is non-adversarial, if you will. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, first of all, this conflict, this war, this struggle, this whatever you want to label it, that's going on internally within each of us is happening on the field of symbology. So well, I'm talking about internally.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you.
And that then gets us to act externally. But I think that both you and Marianne are correct, depending on the metaphor that you're choosing to deal with in your own internal struggle. And there's no right or wrong metaphor.
Let me just say, I totally agree with Marianne. I think what she's talking about is the outcome of the final fight, which is where we quit thinking in adversarial terms and we begin to think in complementary terms. However, that's after the fact. We are in the middle of the battle, and we can't dismiss the battle. That was Arjuna's whole conflict.
It's a battle that is never won. And I think, Bob, you had said that earlier. It's ongoing. That's the battle.
Again, this battle, or what I don't know what term you would put on it, Marianne. I'll leave that to you. But it's happening symbolically. And Red Hawk, your fight and my struggle, and Marianne's, we'll come to that term in a little while, it's all the same.
Oh,
and whatever your unique metaphor that works within your system, your internal system, is the one you have to work with. Now, that metaphor may change over years. And I understand where you're saying Marianne's looking to the external, and I think we all want
No, I'm not saying she's looking to the external. I'm saying she's looking at the internal, but what she's talking about is the outcome. And I'm going to suggest that...
Okay, I'm right here, guys.
I'm going to suggest that
we're mansplaining. We're mansplaining.
And this is where I disagree with you all. You all say there's no win. I say there is a win. I think Buddha showed us the win. I think the great masters have showed us the win. And what it is waking. We wake ourselves up to continual waking. That is the win. It's a continual process where we are now no longer having to fight the sleeping forces, but we are in a complementary relationship with them and stirring them into more wakefulness. And I think that's what Buddha was talking about when he talked about getting free of desire. I think that is the final fight. Now, I don't always see it in the terms of the metaphor of desire, or the reality of desire. I see it in a whole lot of other ways. But I think what Marianne's talking about is the inner battle. I'm not there yet. And so for me to say to myself, I just got to get rid of all these ways of talking to myself because it's conflictual, I can't do that. I've tried 1,000 different ways. So now I'm stuck inside the battle, and I have to see it as the final fight.
Well, and I did not, I never said there was no win. And I think that...
Well, it was a continual fight.
Well, in human beings, but within each one of us, we can master it and conquer it. And I think that language there's no language for some of this stuff.
Oh, amen.
And,
That's what we're trying to ferret out, isn't it?
right.
Exactly.
Yes.
And now I'm going to have to disagree with Marianne, because I don't think that there's a final answer to it. I think that it's going to be ongoing as long as we're alive, and it gets back to that paradox. We go back to Buddha's desire. You try and get away from desire, but the desire to get away from desire is a stronger desire than desire. So we're caught in this paradox, and we have to deal with the external world because it's where we live. But the way we interact with the external world is how we have to find internal balance. And I have to bring the term balance into every show, and I'm sorry that I.
No, it's an important piece.
And the conflict is because we're fighting against ourselves to come to that balance. We're afraid, or we don't want to deal with the deeper parts of ourselves that we deny. But it's only by dealing with those deeper parts of ourselves that we can find out who we truly are, and then move to dealing with the external world in a healthier manner.
Bingo. And I think that's, understanding who we are and why we are here is something that is an ongoing, lifelong search for each one of us. And we're all going to come up with a different answer. But if we understand that is an internal struggle, it's an internal trying to control ourselves versus trying to control the external world. I think when all of the conflict in the world is happening because people are trying to control the external world without first coming to terms with controlling their, the story that you opened with is a perfect example of that. I have conquered the need to have to conquer the world. And that's huge. And when we can understand that you don't have to conquer anything. You just have to discover what it is that, and again, it's not as, I'm not by no means saying this is an easy thing to do, but you have to be able to allow life to flow and understand that we are connected to something beyond ourselves. At least that's what I need to do.
I think that's what the battle is about. That is exactly what the battle's about. And I want to keep making clear, what we're talking about is the mind. We're living in a house of mirrors. You can't have one thought without propagating 1,000 others, most of whom you will never be even aware of. You can't have a single thought without resonating with so many experiences in your own lives that create a feeling in you, and you'll never be able to access anything but the feeling itself. This is why we have concepts called the trickster and coyote. And these are aspects that, unseen aspects that come and nip us in the butt as a consequence of our own thinking and being, if you will. And this is part of the journey. Marianne, earlier you said, once we conquer it, we can. And then you said, you undid the word conquer. You see, our language itself is a trickster, is a coyote being.
Yes.
And what I mentioned earlier, and what this podcast is about, is how do we ferret out a new language, a non-adversarial language of the inner world. Now, if you look at those people who have that, it usually comes from their family of origin plus a good genetic stability. In other words, they've been taught to see the world as a cooperative and for them to be part of it. But the world is in conflict, and we internalize that. So no wonder one of our main metaphors or root metaphors is the battlefield, is a field of conflict. However, this is, the whole concept of an angel and a devil sitting one on each shoulder, there's some reality to that. There's an internal dialogue going on trying to sort this whole damn thing out. And there's no way to come out with any response that offers closure. That's why I believe that the real outcome is stimulating the waking complex in us so that it rules. And no matter what happens, I love Ram Dass saying, if we do our inner work, those demons and dragons later in life become little schmoes we can have into tea. I think there's some truth to that. We can make peace with those aspects of us that are dark. We just can't face them in a conflictual way and expect a resolve. And I think that's what I hear you saying, Marianne, that in the end, the final fight is won by getting rid of the whole language of fight and battlefield and conflict and developing a more dominant language and model that is one of cooperation and moving together and seeing the interdependence and oneness of things and seeing ourselves as integral to that.
Well, wasn't it Einstein that said that we can't solve the problems with the same level of thinking that got us into the problems? I'm paraphrasing that. I'm sure that's not the exact quote. But you're right. This stuff has been enculturated in us. We're deep in it, and I think that the idea of waking up begins when we start to understand that these are systems that were created and that we can create different ones. And I think that the way it always has been does not necessarily mean that needs to be the way it always is.
Yeah. I'd like to go back to your metaphor of the trickster for a minute, because I think that's very important, because that trickster is what's putting the barrier between what we want to know about ourselves and what we need to know about ourselves. And the trickster is constantly putting us on the wrong path by any number of means. But I'd also like to say that the trickster isn't just internal. The trickster's also out in the world, throwing us little kinds of problems that we have to deal with, whether it's physical or emotional or financial or whatever. So this trickster is totally embodied in everything we do. And we've got to realize that somehow we have to come to terms with that trickster and try and turn him into an ally rather than an enemy. And that maybe is one way to define waking. And
also a way of saying that's the way that you do the battle. You concede at one level. What did someone say? It was a Pyrrhic victory. We won the battle, but we lost the war.
Yeah.
Or we lost the battle and won the war. I mean, it's kind of, it's an ongoing thing. But, and that's what makes it so confusing, because you don't know when you're being tricked or not tricked. And your own mind can trick you. And so, yeah, it's a process. It's, and that's where I think when we act out in the world and we see the way things turn out, and then we go, oh, wait, that's not what I wanted to happen, then possibly we were tricked into thinking that this is the way to act. And then maybe the outcomes do matter. Maybe it's that's our feedback loop, our individual feedback loop is, oh, okay. I think what happens is, and people, I see this a lot with people that are working with trauma, that it's like, when we make those mistakes and we get those negative things, then we come back and we start to beat ourselves up and go, oh my gosh, I'm going to just give up, versus, oh wait, that was just a part of me that thought that, and that part doesn't need to be involved in my next decision, right? And so just kind of, and Red Hawk, you've talked about this so many times about that, the whole algorithm, that life is just this big trickster playing tricks on us until we can figure it out. So,
it's the house of mirrors getting lost in the house of mirrors, and I mean the whole inner nature of things and the complexity of the way memory works, the way experience works, the way emotions work. All of these things are are part of creating the world, however the world creates us. And, we have woken up to, climate change. We've woken up to all kinds of injustices, racial and otherwise, in the last 15, 20 years in ways that we never could have imagined before, creating whole new, bringing whole new languages into our everyday world. Of who would have thought we'd be talking about some of the computer programs that are based on non-symmetry and stuff like that, that's predicting weather patterns that give us an overall view of climate and how we see the difference of those. Over and over, we're waking up to not just what we've done outside, but what we are stuck in on the inside. And it's a very different thing than 200 years ago. Human beings their main stuckness wasn't in their own stuff. Our stuckness now is our own stuff. And that is a huge dilemma, it seems to me, when we think of the mind being a house of mirrors. How do we sort that out? And I'm thinking that sorting, when I think of this battlefield of me, that is really what it is. It's this sorting out of, the stuff that says this ain't the way to go, and the stuff that says this is the way to go, which of course is an algorithm.
Oh. Yeah, as you were, I started thinking about, our culture again, and what does it mean to be, to say that we are successful? And when you look at a lot of the things that, when you're talking about the environment, when we look at the things that we're doing to the environment, we are being very unsuccessful in protecting our environment. And yet there are people that have created this, and I'm being influenced here a little bit by a show I saw on Frontline about big oil and the decisions that have been being made all through the years, where there's no denying that climate change is real and it's caused by human actions. And yet to be successful, to make money was the bottom line, and that drove things and stalled us for 20 plus years. So when we redefine what does it mean to be successful, does it mean that we have created an environment for our children and grandchildren to survive and thrive? Or does it mean that we are able to conquer others right now? And so I think those are the conversations that we need to have as well.
Amen. And, this is in terms of waking up, the human species, we're not going to wake up with a third world conflict. It's not going to happen. We're going to wake up through a fourth world conflict, which is this inner battle, which is us agreeing that there is this place where we are in conflict with ourselves, and really start to look at ways to resolve that, to see ourselves as part of the same happening. And speaking of a happening, this happening is about to end because we're running over a little bit. So, Marianne, final comment?
Well, I was just going to say, I think one of the things that we need to acknowledge is that we have to be willing to change. We have to be willing to take what we have learned as, and been embedded in us, and look at it from another perspective, that possibly there's another way to see things, and there's another way to do things that could be more beneficial to the whole, rather than just to us. So the battle is real. Yeah.
All right, Bob, final comments?
We're each dealing with this internal battle. But once we realize that, and then we realize that everyone else is dealing with their own internal battles, that is maybe the first step, or a big step, towards the compassionate understanding of others. We see someone act in the world in a way that we perceive as wrong. But because we realize that they have their own internal struggle that they're dealing with, we can step back a little bit from that action and have compassion for them and their own struggle, and realize that those actions are there for a reason. And then we can begin to focus on ways in which we can make it easier for people to deal with themselves without the world impinging upon them and forcing them into incorrect actions because of the trickster and all of the things we've been discussing. So getting to know ourselves enables us to be more compassionate about others.
Amen. And you know, I will say that one of the things that I woke up to early in life was that everybody is not working or paying attention to themselves. And that's been very, very difficult in my own evolution to realize that some people really, they're on a different journey. You know, and Marianne, you said something to me that was very important. And, you know, it was like, how do we make change a positive aspect instead of a negative aspect in our lives, so that we see change as a good thing and not a bad thing? I think that that's part of what we are stuck in. You know, I woke up in a world full of refrigerators and TVs and blenders and gas stoves, all kinds of technology stuff, transistor radios. Man, everybody I knew as a kid had a transistor radio next to their bed going to sleep. You know, it was an amazing thing. And yet all of this has created a situation that has caused us to be stuck. I mean, I read 4 articles this week about cutting down the Amazon so we can grow more beef to have more burgers and steaks. You know, what's the cost? You see, we're looking for a way to talk about what it is to be stuck and what it is we are stuck in. Look at the petrochemicals and energy systems. Man, we are trying like the dickens to get unstuck. Next week, we're going to get unstuck. That's a joke. We're not going to get unstuck, but we'll make stuckness a little bit more clear. God's peace, and in all things, may the oneness be all over you.